ZombieTech. Welcome to ZombieTech, a forum for engineers, scientists, and inventors to ponder on the technologies needed to survive the inevitable zombie apocalypse.
She's Addie.
He's Whisker.
And today we have what some old white men have referred to as one of the rock stars of the hacking elite, Mr. Joe Grand.
Wow, thank you. Who said that?
A senator once upon a time.
Oh, I remember those days. Wow.
Yeah.
It's an honor.
Long time ago, before they referred to them as the intertubes.
That's right.
What was it, about 10 years ago?
Oh gosh, it must have been, yeah.
It was 1998 when we testified, so that was
even more than 10 years ago.
13 years ago.
I remember
still like
that.
the same old white guys.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Of course. Yeah, I remember seeing that on Slashdot when it happened, and I was like, wow, I can't believe they let those guys in that room.
Yeah, we were the first group of people to testify in front of Senate with fake names that weren't part of the witness protection program.
Too funny.
So that was pretty cool.
Wow.
They seemed pretty comfortable with the idea at the time, too.
Somewhat. Yeah, the senators didn't really seem to mind, but the people behind the scenes who were organizing it had kind of a challenge on convincing the powers that be that it was okay.
I sort of got the impression, watching it through again, that they sort of were doing the whole thing to some extent tongue-in-cheek, because it was mostly on their part more of a PR move to pass a whole bunch of legislation to make it to lock the internet down more and whatnot.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I guess the GAO just released a report, and then they wanted us to come in as 7 hackers from the loft and basically give like a worst case scenario of what we could do with the internet and computers, and could we take down satellites and do whatever. And so we gave them the worst case scenario. And of course, the media got a hold of that and took off with it. And I would like to think that the senators actually learned something. But whether anything actually changed because of us, I think still remains to be seen.
Yeah, the only quote that I'm sure most people ever usually see out of that was the we can take down the internet in 30 minutes, and
yes.
the people reciting that quote have no idea what was actually meant by that quote.
That's right. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot that we said that day that was way more useful than that sensational tidbit. But of course, everybody took that and ran with it. And we did too. We ended up making T-shirts out of it. So, if you can't live it down, might as well grasp it.
Make a meme out of it.
That's right. Our own little meme.
That's awesome. Wow.
So basically, Joe here is I suppose somewhat through happenstance, but to some extent very intentionally, a pioneer of many of the things that we just think of as commonplace today. He was involved with a group of people who essentially pioneered the idea of what today would be called a hackerspace, and also very instrumental in changing the way in which people who have software bugs relate them to companies, for example.
Yep.
Before these guys, a software company would basically hide their bugs. Today, they can't get away with that. And that is to some extent due to Loft and the work that Joe and his friends did back then.
Yeah, I mean, basically there was, back when we were doing this in the early 1990s to the entire decade from the 1990s to around 2000, we would find security vulnerabilities in products and find bugs. But there wasn't really a security industry. Like nowadays, if somebody finds a bug, they can email security@microsoft.com and say, Microsoft, we found a problem in Windows or whatever. Mm-hmm. But back then, there just wasn't a structure like that. So we were kind of forging new ground, and we didn't really know how to proceed. Like a lot of companies, once if we told them there was a problem, they would say, oh, no one's ever going to do that. Purely theoretical. And then we would turn around and write some exploit code to demonstrate the problem and say, no, it's actually a practical problem. They go, oh, okay. So then we always joked that the Loft was making the theoretical practical. where we would just do this full disclosure to release the information and force the vendor to respond to it.
Right.
And now there's a whole computer security industry, and there's responsible disclosure practices, and there's a whole debate about full disclosure versus partial disclosure versus no disclosure. It's a different industry now, and it's just a different world now. But we definitely were the David fighting the Goliath at that time.
Yeah, I remember these times very, very clearly, and actually had no idea that Joe Grand was Kingpin. Now, if somebody had told me that Joe Grand was Kingpin, I'm not sure I would have been as readily okay with Addie sending out the email to see if we could get you on the show, because honestly, back at that period of time, I was chatting a lot in a chat system that Excite was running called Virtual Places. And there was a lot of basically script kiddies running around. They just cracked part of the protocol. And these guys would go into all of the geeky rooms where a lot of us would hang out and talk tech, and they'd start kicking people out of the rooms, booting people, doing all sorts of annoying stuff. And because I was aware of the work that they were doing over at Loft and the mentality that came out of there, I, instead of just taking it and, trying to find someplace else to go, learned how to program, learned how to reverse engineer protocols, and released publicly exploits to do all of the things that these guys were doing, and handed them over to Excite. Excite, of course, refused to fix the problems correctly. They just changed the login. So I started a website in which a whole group of guys got together, and we were able to crack their login changes every single day that they'd change them within a few hours, and keep releasing and keep releasing and keep releasing these exploits until they actually fixed the underlying problems. So
the cat and mouse game.
So, Joe, you guys were an inspiration to me. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That's good to hear. It's always cool to hear the stories of that, because I never feel like I would be an inspiration to anybody, because I just kind of do what I like doing and hope people like it.
Well, you got a reaction out of Whisker.
Now, as far as providing a worst-case scenario, I think you guys completely got it wrong, and I think Addie would agree.
I would? Yeah.
Yes.
I don't even know.
Zombies are much worse than using old protocols to separate the old school data networks.
It's true. We did not anticipate the zombie apocalypse.
No.
We definitely should have, because, it's a big problem.
I mean, how many movies have taught us that ambulating undead with flesh rotting off their faces are zombies? You never see them acknowledge it in zombie movies. I don't know if you ever realize that.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, are we more secure from zombies or from attacks?
Well, we are. I don't know if you are.
Yeah, I'm probably not.
We've actually thought about this to some extent.
Yes, that's true.
Now, have you had a chance to go back and listen to any of the shows?
No. I like going in as a virgin.
Awesome. So, let's
Madonna.
see. Basically, what we're interested in is figuring out what you're up to lately, what you're working on, and basically keeping you honest, and seeing if we could apply the technology to either rebuilding society after zombies or actually fighting zombies.
Yeah. Well, that's what Addie had mentioned to me in the email, and I was thinking about that. I was actually thinking about that today when I was printing out my three-dimensional flower on my MakerBot. Because it had nice sharp points on it. It would be a great tool for zombies, as long as you didn't have to actually touch them with it, right? Because it would break. Because it was really, it's really fragile. But if the zombie sees it, they might say, "Ooh, that's really sharp," and then run somewhere else.
Perhaps.
I don't know if that's how zombies behave, but I would just assume that it would be a good deterrent.
We could try. I mean, you could at least put like these pointy, fragile flower things on the top of like your walls, your bunker walls, and then if they tried to climb over the walls, they'd get
poked in
the foot.
Poked with plastic. Yeah, like barbed wire, but barbed flowers, so at least it looks nice.
There you go. And that's one good application for the MakerBot.
We've
Zombie
brought
deterrence.
this up a few times now. I think a lot of people are looking forward to when that technology moves past the additive sort of way that it's done now and becomes an extruding system where you can extrude a part out of the surface rather than build it up on the surface.
Yeah.
Now, we're obviously still far away from that technology, but that would be really cool when you start using like individual carbon nanotube stuff and extrude it outward.
Yeah.
Then
would
your
be cool.
pokey bits are no longer sort of lame, and you could do like atom-wide blades. Where
Yeah.
the edge of it was just a single atom wide, and it could cut through most anything,
Including zombies.
Including zombies.
Oh yeah,
Most
zombies,
importantly, zombies.
no problem. Concrete walls, there, sure.
So yeah,
What-
no, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to think another thing that I just finished up was that laser rangefinder for parallax. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think it was.
I know Maker Dino and Roy helped to. I don't know if that was beta testing or what,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah,
So-
they were two of my trusted beta testers, and I'd never actually done like a beta test for a product before. Normally, I just
Put
would
it
work
out.
on it myself,
Yeah.
get all the as many bugs as I could out of it, and then release it. But this was for this laser rangefinder. I was trying to do like a low cost, easy way to interface with microcontrollers and everything, and kind of take the complexity away from the actual laser range finding process, and just return values that are useful to a human. So yeah, Dino and Roy and a few other people, Chris Savage from Parallax, served as my beta testers, and I sent them units, and they actually implemented them into little robots and projects and stuff, which was really cool.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that this can be used for a bunch of different things. One of them, you could shine it outwards from your bunker and take range readings and even see if zombies are approaching you. But then what you could do, if you have the mechanical capabilities, which I don't, maybe put it on like a XY little thing, and once you identify a zombie, now you're not using it as a rangefinder. Now you can just shine follow the face of the zombie and just shine the laser into his eye.
blind it.
And just blind it, yeah. Because you can control the laser independently, so why not?
Sure. I think it would also work. Couldn't it work as like some sort of targeting system for turret guns or something?
Sure, yeah, you could always just shine the laser on the zombie and then have some other... Oh, yeah, you could do that, right. Because you're shining the laser on it, you're getting the distance, then you send it to something else and have it shoot it.
There you go.
Assuming bullets work with zombies, I don't know what do you guys use these days?
Well, so we've come to a couple of conclusions. One's so bullets will run out unless there are like bullet manufacturers. Well, we could make or bought bullets, I suppose. But given
Plastic
that
one.
your three-year-old was able to crush the sharp tip,
Different guests
yeah.
have different theories on what would work well. Let's see. Chris Gamble basically said he was going to run around with a shotgun.
Yep.
But Dino was on the opposite side of the spectrum. He plans on running around and draining car batteries of their battery acid and putting them in super soakers, which is kind of awesome.
Yep.
I haven't heard of that one before. That's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I would just run. I would just keep running.
Well, you can run to our zombie bunker then.
Okay, cool.
And then we can start designing things.
Which is probably a long way from San Francisco. Where are you guys anyway?
We're in Rochester, Minnesota, middle of
Oh,
good old United States, pretty much.
wow. Well, at least I could make a stop at DigiKey on the way into your place. So I can pick anything up that you might need along the way.
Awesome.
I'm not sure San Francisco would be the best place to be in a zombie apocalypse.
Patience.
I mean, all the zombies would have thick rimmed glasses and expensive haircuts.
and fixed gear bicycles.
Hipster zombies.
So you got the laser rangefinder, and you just recently put that step extruder. Was it Mark 7?
The Mark 7, yeah. So in my MakerBot, I just put the Step Struder Mark 7, which is their newest extruder, which uses a 1.75 millimeter filament, into my MakerBot, which is super cool. I did that last night, and it's funny because I get really obsessed with projects, and building the MakerBot is not a money-making venture for me. Like, it's not work, right? It's more of just a fun hobby because I can print lots of neat little tchotchkes.
Right.
But I mean, I've been completely obsessed with it. So all day yesterday, all day today, I've been printing stuff out and fine-tuning the bot and kind of personalizing it and everything. It's exactly what MakerBot wants.
Right.
But it's great. I mean, it's actually funny that it reminds me of like back in the 80s. When I had my 300 baud acoustic coupler modem in my Atari 400 computer. And like I'd get on bulletin board systems and just download every possible game that I could. But at 300 baud, it would take forever, right?
Right.
Like 300 bits a second. So I had a little kitchen timer, and I would start downloading a file. You know, it would be 20K, and it would take, I don't know, a long time, right? I don't know. I can't do the math in my head, but I don't know, say 20 minutes, half an hour. So I'd set my timer, I'd go do something else and come back, and I'd say, ooh, is my game done? And either the game would work, the file transfer would be complete, or like somebody accidentally banged the table, or like my sister would pick up the phone, and I go upstairs and the transfer didn't work.
Right.
And that's kind of how it is with the MakerBot. Is I would start something and start a print of whatever. Like I've made fake mustaches and little robots and cars and everything. The mustache was the best. But I'd start the print, I'd go upstairs, I'd do something, I'd come back down to my lab and see if it worked. So it's sort of that same sort of thing, like start the print, come back later, and just kind of cross your fingers. And I would say, most of the time it worked okay. Sometimes it was a complete spaghetti plastic failure. But I was just thinking it was like, I don't know how long, like 25 years later, right? So shift that 25 years from now, then everybody's going to just be able to print out whatever right away, and it's not going to be a big deal. But this sort of is the equivalent of like the 300 baud modem and people just getting into bulletin board systems.
Fair enough. Now, I know you do a lot of hardware hacking, and I know you've kind of hacked the MakerBot to, I don't know, go faster, or you've done at least
I've built it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the extent of the hacking on this thing. But yeah, I do. I do some hardware hacking. I haven't done a lot of hardware hacking lately. I've been doing mostly design.
Okay.
So the rangefinder took it was on and off for about 3 years to get it working properly, and that was a lot of development work for essentially what is pretty much a low volume project,
right,
but just super cool. And to see people use that is awesome. But then I've done some other consumer designs in parallel to that. But yeah, haven't really broken any hardware recently.
Okay. So, I mean, when you, is it just like an idea that you have? So you decide one day looking out, gosh, zombies could attack at any time, and I really need a laser rangefinder. So then... Pretty
much, except, yeah, I mean, in that particular case, Ken Gracie from Parallax realized that zombies could potentially attack his place. So he called me and said, hey, this zombie thing is a big problem. Can you build this rangefinder? And that's what it started. And of course I said, sure, not knowing what I was getting into.
Right.
Right. But other times it's just my own ideas, and I'll build prototypes. Sometimes the project is not worth it time-wise or financially to bring it into production.
Okay.
So I'll release stuff open source. I'll put anything on my website. But then other times it's worth bringing it to production, and maybe Parallax will manufacture it for me, or maybe I'll find somebody else to do it. Mm-hmm. And just because I like seeing stuff get out there, but I don't like the support angle, and I don't like maintaining the project. Right. My attention span is way too short. I'd rather just design new things more often and just let somebody else deal with the rest of it. And that's why I don't sell my own stuff.
Gotcha. And actually, that was one of the questions too, because I was looking through your website and you have a crap ton of projects. But if you were the single person doing the production, like, you'd be a miracle, because to not only design but also produce would just take up every minute of your day.
Yeah.
So, and I'm guessing that's why you tend to license a lot of your products.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of work to manufacture, and I mean, support really is the big thing. Like support and kind of marketing and everything. And I also don't really consider myself a great marketing person. I feel really slimy if I try to sell myself.
Sure.
or like sell a product that I've done. Like I just can't. I don't know. I mean, it's bad business, right? Because I can't sell myself. But, you know, for example, like Parallax has no problem selling my stuff.
Right.
And they'll advertise it.
Right.
But if I did it myself, I just don't have the mindset to sell myself like that. So I prefer when other people do it. And, you know, I mean, I'm an engineer, and I just like sitting around designing stuff.
It's kind of an ideal thing. I mean,
it is. I mean, it's hard to make money. I mean, you never know. I never know when I'm going to get paid.
Sure.
Luckily, I'm super thrifty, if you can use that word. So, you know, I can stretch $1 really far.
Right.
Having a 3-year-old now is a little more stressful because I need to actually be able to pay for food and stuff.
Right.
But it's yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it, and I've worked in real companies before, real product development companies, and then I did the TV show and I did some computer security stuff.
Right.
But I just realized that working alone seems to work best for me. And then having, you know, connections to other people to be able to communicate with them is great. But I just can't. I don't function well in like a corporate environment.
Sure. And that's interesting because I know in terms of like folks from the loft, like pretty much everybody went into the corporate structure.
They did
afterwards.
They did.
And that almost like, I don't know if it's, well, according to what I've always thought, like isn't it kind of like the antithesis of hacking?
Yeah, I mean, that, you know, I definitely have strong opinions about it, and people will say, well, you know, people grow up, people change, families happen, and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, they do, but, you know, I mean, it depends on how strongly you initially believed in what you were doing.
Sure.
You know, I have a family,
yeah,
and I still believe in the hacker mindset more than working in a corporate environment. And you can, you know, if you believe strongly enough in something, you can make it happen regardless. But yeah, a lot of those guys ended up going into the corporate world and even the government arena. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. I wouldn't do it. But if they want to, that's totally fine. And it is interesting to see, though, because it is kind of the antithesis. But there's so much overlap now because you have all these hackers working in corporations, too, and they're kind of giving their flavor. So everybody has their own opinion about it.
Sure. So what's your opinion? I mean, and I don't want you making enemies out of anyone at the same time, you know.
I mean, I can't say what's good or bad for anyone else, but I just know that it wouldn't work for me. I'm too stubborn, and I know the way that I work now, and having experienced working in real companies, and when I had worked at a company called Design Continuum, which still is a product development an industrial design firm based out of Boston, and it was completely awesome. Like I probably would have still been working there today because there was about 60 people in the company, but I was the only electrical engineer outside of my manager, and he would sort of shield me from all of the politics and the problems and the client and everything. So I just got to do design work.
That's great.
And like it was totally awesome. It was just ideal. But then we decided to sell the loft and start At Stake, which was a computer security consulting firm, because computer security was starting to be up and coming, and all of the 7 of us decided to quit our jobs and try to do this security thing. So I got sucked into the security field and had to leave Design Continuum, which that was by far the best place that I'd ever worked. And then going through the experiences of At Stake and seeing the venture capital and seeing mismanagement and executives that don't necessarily believe in the same direction of the company. And I was at a very impressionable age. I was, when I was in the loft, I started at around 16, and then At Stake happened at about 20, 21, 23 or something like that. And so I was young enough to have that stuff really stick with me. And just seeing the way that company ran really tarnished me. It's sort of like having a bad girlfriend, like a long relationship with a bad girlfriend. And then, 4 years later, you're like, man, did I just waste? Yeah, did I just waste 4 years of my life? And then you're pissed, and you're miserable, and you try to find somebody else, but you're so angry that like you just come off as like this complete loser. Yeah. And that's sort of how At Stake and the whole transformation of the people within the company and everything, it affected me that way. Where now I'm very careful about my business, and I'll do things that I like to do, and I won't sacrifice what I like to do for anybody.
Sure.
And so I would I'm picky about what projects I work on. If I do consulting, for engineering design. I'm very picky about that. And that might mean I make less money, right? Because I don't give in to every possible request, or I won't change a design direction, or maybe I won't be able to work with the client. But that, to me, that's an okay trade-off. I would rather make less money and be completely happy and comfortable with my approach than make a lot of money and just
deal with ex-girlfriends all over the place.
Yeah, and feel dirty and just be angry all the time.
Sure. Huh, interesting. Now, in terms of security, computer security firms and such, whenever I think of them, I think that they're always reactive rather than proactive. And, I think that's kind of lame.
Well, you don't always, you hear about them being reactive more than you hear about them being proactive, but these days you have to be proactive.
So is that where you bring hackers in? I mean,
Yeah, the pen testers would be what they call themselves these days.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, there's, if somebody is dedicated enough, they will defeat your system, they'll break in your, whatever they're going to do, they're going to achieve.
They're going to get done, yeah.
So security has always been trying to reduce the risk to a level that's acceptable. And every situation is different. And you can kind of do your due diligence, and you can bring in people to analyze your network and do pen testing and things like that. But just because I don't find something doesn't mean the next guy, won't find it. Yeah.
Well, especially, like you said, if they have the motive, then they'll find a way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's just because the internet is so huge now. I mean, what we had talked about in 1998 was just a fraction of what could potentially happen now. I mean, everything is connected online. Now it's not even just computers, but it's, obviously the SCADA system stuff, the high-end industrial controllers, but then it's all these low-end Internet of things.
Right.
Right. So all this stuff is connected now. And I mean, but yeah, most of the time people are reactive, especially big companies, because they don't move as fast. And to be proactive is to take the steps to be proactive is hard, and it's just there's no solution that's ever going to protect you completely. So I just assume that always assume that you're being watched, or that you're owned, or someone's reading email. I try not to send nasty emails anymore, because I know eventually they're going to end up online and somebody's going to read them. So if I have to say something really bad, or if I'm in an argument with somebody, I'll call them on the phone. Which if it's Skype, maybe someone's watching, but I'll stick to the landline. But yeah, you never know if somebody's watching. But it's funny, because I ended up getting involved in security not because I wanted to do it as a career. And maybe that's also where some of these other guys at the loft realized that it could be a career for them, and that was okay. But I was always an engineer first.
Okay.
I've been involved in designing stuff out of magazines like Popular Electronics and Radio Electronics and Electronics Now and Nuts and Bolts since I was 7.
Right.
And that's just what I did is engineering. So I got kind of, and then because of the hacker community at the time were people that just happened to have computers that had modems, and they would connect to bulletin board systems, and then we'd do war dialing and find other systems. So just kind of, it was part of that whole technology experience. But then getting sucked into the actual security industry was I didn't think it would become a career. I still wanted to be an engineer, and I'm always a hardware guy.
Right.
So once I left at Stake, it was oh, good, I can be an engineer again. I don't have to deal with security. And now I realize that I can teach people about how to break hardware devices, which is awesome, but I don't have to do it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Because I would rather design.
Well, and you've done quite a few hacking, and I know you say recently you haven't done anything necessarily, but I mean, I think it's still pretty recent that you're able to hack into the mass transit system. Things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
I mean, you're right. It's funny because I maybe it is just because my attention span is so short. But it's if it hasn't happened within a few months, I sort of feel well, what have I done recently, right? But yeah, I guess if you look back, there's a lot of stuff that I did that were first as far as breaking hardware products.
Right.
Especially back in the early 2000s, and a lot of things haven't really changed since then. But yeah, I mean, breaking the San Francisco parking meters, the smart card interface that they used was in July of 2009.
Yeah, not too long ago.
I guess not too long ago. Some of they've fixed part of the problem, but not the underlying root cause of the problem. So I believe it can still be exploited.
All right, guys.
Though I haven't personally tried, so it's up to someone else.
This kind of skill set is extremely valuable in the context of what we normally talk about, in the sense that if you can reverse engineer this stuff from the outside enough to bend it to your will, and you can do rapid prototyping, then there's basically no stopping you in a sort of scavenger situation from rebuilding all kinds of useful stuff out of these parts.
Right. That's right. Well, especially when the whole infrastructure goes down.
Exactly. Actually, that's, we're going to have to send you an invite to our zombie bunker, because one of the biggest problems that we have is that we can't get gas from the gas station, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, the zombie apocalypse is going to happen so fast that there are bound to be gas stations in the middle of nowhere that still have gas. And the only way you can access them is by having it recognize your credit card.
Actually, no.
Right?
They've got accessed hatches right at the top of the tanks. The tanks are buried, and you can just drop a hose down there and pump it out.
Well, assuming there aren't zombies on top of it.
There you go. So assuming there are zombies on top of it, I mean, we gotta figure out how to hack these so that we can get free gas, right?
Yeah, to do like remote dispensing or something. Well, yeah, there's a lot of people are looking at gas pumps because it's such a great place for credit card fraud.
Right.
And maybe that's the first step. But actually, speaking about like the whole reclamation thing, there's a new show. What's it called? Something with Hackett.
Oh,
we heard him talking about it at Open Hardware Summit.
Like Make It with Hackett or
Make
something.
It with Hackett or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, he's from New York City, and just a total technology reclaimist.
Right.
I just made up a new word. That's what he reclaims technology.
Heard it first here, folks.
So you should invite him to the bunker because I think you'll need him.
We should.
A few people have actually suggested that we get him on the show at some point. So he's on the radar. He's on our zombie radar already.
Let's see let's verify the Chris Hackett. Stuck with Hackett. That's what it's called.
Stuck with Hackett.
And it's on Science Channel.
Yep. That's right. I've heard.
Not that I'm promoting Science Channel or Discovery Channel in any way, but
that's just where it is.
The show is interesting, and he seems really cool.
Very cool.
Good for the zombie apocalypse.
Yep.
Yeah, I enjoyed his talk at Open Hardware Summit. It's very interesting.
So, when you design things, like if you were asked to design a new mass transit, I don't know, the parking meter or whatever, do you design it to prevent other hackers from hacking it? Like, do you go into it thinking, well, if I were a hacker, I would try this, so I'm going to build in kind of a safety measure? Yeah,
well, in theory, I wouldn't personally design such a complicated system because that's sort of not my area.
True.
And I try to avoid things that security-related stuff because it's just so difficult to design hardware securely. But yes, one of the things that when I teach hardware hacking is essentially to teach not only pen testers and things like that, but also teach designers about the way that hardware hackers think, because then they can go, oh, okay, so most attackers would try to read the firmware from the part. So maybe I need to, add the security bit, or maybe I need to protect this area or do this. So if designers can think about the process that hardware hackers go through, they can at least try to be a little more defensive about protecting their system. But I say to take that with a grain of salt because pretty much anything that a designer does to try to protect against attacks could still be defeated. So it sort of raises the bar, like adds another layer of security, maybe gets rid of some of the script kiddies and people that are looking for kind of opportunistic attacks. And they would move on to something else. But again, a dedicated person would spend the time to defeat those.
The way I try to explain this topic to people, and it applies to the software side as well, is that nothing is secure if the thing that it is securing is more valuable than the cost it takes to make it insecure.
Right.
So if you've got parking meters and somebody basically wants to hack it just to park for free, that's only worth, a couple of bucks to them. So it's not really worth the effort to spend $1,000 trying to hack it in such a way that you can park for free.
Unless that is amortized over, your 1 year of free parking that you get before they fix the problem. So you always, the attack always wants to cost less than the value of the thing that you're getting.
Yeah.
And that's where the big problems are. Like cell phone cloning back in the day was a huge market because the equipment to clone a cell phone was very minimal, and it would take at least a month before the cell phone network would determine that the phone was cloned. So you could spend minimal amount of money and clone cell phones for thousands of people and charge a lot of money, and that's why there was such cell phone fraud. Because it was an easily repeatable task.
Right.
And the parking meter is one of those things where people say, you only get a few dollars free here and there. And it's true. It's for one person, it's not a huge financial hit. But if you have one guy with a smart card writer that's now writing, their smart card emulator for other friends, and the smart card cost 50 cents. Now the cost is low if you spread it over lots of people. Maybe you sell those cards for $20 or $50. So then it scales, and then it becomes a big issue.
Yep. So then do you do these things, and then do you bring the problem to the company saying, look, I can do this, up to you guys to fix it, otherwise I'm going to keep exploiting it?
It depends. More recently, like with the parking meter stuff was an interesting case because a year earlier, there were some kids from MIT, some students from MIT doing a class project for a security class who had discovered a bunch of vulnerabilities in the MBTA, in the Boston public transit system.
Yep.
As far as the magnetic stripe cards they were using and also their proximity cards they were using, and essentially broke open the whole system, broke their really weak crypto, and found all sorts of vulnerabilities, physical and technology-related stuff. And those kids it was very good work, very thorough, and brought the problems to the MBTA and said, hey, here are the issues. We would like to present this at DEF CON in a few months.
Sure.
But we're giving you the heads up so you could fix the problems beforehand. And the MBTA overreacted, got the FBI involved.
Oh my God.
Sued the kids, prevented them from giving the talk at DEF CON. Thankfully, the Electronic Frontier Foundation got involved, who's a digital...
The good guys.
The good guys, digital rights activists and lawyers and stuff. And they got involved to essentially fight back against the MBTA to prove that these kids' research was completely legitimate. They weren't taking advantage of the system or anything like that.
Right.
And eventually, the case got dropped because of some technicality in the way that the Massachusetts law was written, and the place where a comma was changed the way that the law. It got off on a technicality, which was very lucky.
Gosh.
But if it hadn't, then these kids would have been in deep trouble. And it would have set a precedent for researchers from that point forward, as far as showing that a company could sue you for legitimate research that you're doing. So my colleagues and I were a little bit worried about that in the case of the parking meters. So we didn't go to the city first. And we knew we were going to give this talk. We didn't go to the city first. But what we decided is that we didn't need to release every single byte of information to allow somebody to create their own free parking smart card, right? Because we wanted to demonstrate the problem and the weakness of this parking meter implementation and potentially other implementations around the world. But we didn't need to let everybody get free parking at the same time.
Right.
So we went through the process, and I essentially I released the source code for the smart card emulator that I wrote. That was I wrote it in PIC-C for one version of PIC. I can't remember which one, and put it on a PIC-based smart card and used that. So I released the template for that, but all of the data communications, all those bytes, I just had them all FFs. And so that way, at least, people could see, oh, okay, here's a routine for adding a unit. Here's a routine for resetting the card. Here's a routine for doing this and that. But all the data was blank, right? So somebody who wanted to actually get free parking would have to go through the whole process like we already did.
Right.
So I felt that was a good compromise instead of going to the city first and potentially having an adverse effect. And then after the fact, when the media got a hold of our work and it was published all over the place, the media actually did us a great favor because they found the exact person to talk to within SFMTA, within the company here, or within the right person at the city.
Right.
So then I called them up and said, I would love to meet with you guys and give you the presentation.
Right.
And they were, they happily accepted it and acknowledged the problem and understood the problem and took some steps to fix that, they say. So, they went about it the right way. I mean, that was a very rare circumstance where a company actually appreciates the work that somebody is doing, because, security researchers are essentially doing unsolicited work. Mm-hmm. And then they go and call your baby ugly. So it's a very sensitive, it's a sensitive area to be in, because if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Joe, your design sucks.
Right.
It's like you could have done this and this and this. Oh, and by the way, you need to fix this. It's hard not to take that personally, right?
Sure.
Even if you're at a company, but still, if you're responsible for selecting a product, or if you're a designer there, it's hard to take it personally, or hard not to take it personally. Mm-hmm. So the response from companies typically is negative. It's not as positive as the city was. But every case is different. And they went ahead, they actually met with the meter vendor behind closed doors. I have no idea what went on in the meeting. I offered to sit in on the meeting, but no one ever called me back. Oh. But yeah, but as far as I know, they had fixed part of the problem, but not the core issue. Mm-hmm. And now they've deployed new types of parking meters as well. So now there's another type of parking in the city that's credit card based. So there's probably problems there.
Right.
But you can never win. I mean, as researchers, you kind of take the risk and hope you don't get sued, and hope that somebody takes your work and does something meaningful with it.
Right.
But you just never know.
So, and that's what I also wondered, because when I read up on what Loft did, which is essentially what you did with these meters, is you find a problem, and then you have the documentation, and then you go to the company and say, okay, look, this is the problem. You don't want to fix it, we'll exploit it so that you can see what the risk is. I think that's what Loft did, right?
Yeah, we would. We would never do it against their actual system. Like, we had always set up our own networks internally, and we always had our own legitimate software running and things like that. Mm-hmm. But we would always write the exploit code to visually show it. And I think that's to demonstrate the actual problem. And back when we were first doing it, it was pretty much okay to release, the full, to open the kimono and release the exact exploit code. Because there weren't a lot of people that could take that code and do something with it. Mm-hmm. But nowadays it's a little bit different, because you have, information gets out so much faster. As soon as somebody releases even just an advisory with no exploit code, somebody could read that and put together an exploit and sell it to somebody malicious instantly. So it's just the way that you disclose information needs to kind of vary depending on the severity of the bug and the company that you're working with and everything. But like what I would have done 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if I found a problem with SFMTA, is I would have released all of the information and then forced them to fix the problem.
Right.
But nowadays I think, okay, maybe it's a little more responsible to not release the entire code, because most people can see the problem without needing to know exactly how to get the free.
Sure.
Yeah, and that, I thought that was a good way to do it, and the city did appreciate that, even though they did say that they're more worried about people just not paying for parking than doing some high-tech attack, which I guess I could see.
Sure. I think that's interesting. I mean, it's quote-unquote nice to see that there's still a place for hackers who, like, look for exploits, but at the same time, you would think that a company designing their product would know that there are hackers looking for exploits, and therefore would be that much more careful. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. I mean, a lot of companies don't want to spend the money or the effort really to find problems.
Yeah.
And there's actually companies now that have a bug bounty program, and they pay outside researchers money if they find legitimate bugs.
Yeah.
Especially exploitable security things. So companies now, I think it's a little bit of a lazy approach, and they're sort of outsourcing security to the community, right? It's like crowdsourced security or something,
right?
But it's still better than nothing, right? I mean, at least the researcher gets paid in that point,
right?
Which is better than
instead of sued.
Instead of sued, or doing it for free as a service to the community,
right?
So that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, the smart companies have figured out that you can play that same game with reward versus risk and turn it right on its head and say, okay, if you give us the exploits, we'll give you money. And, it's a nice, easy legal payday, and you don't have to worry about laundering your profits or anything like that.
Right.
And that can be pretty attractive to a hacker who hasn't crossed the line of gray yet.
Yeah. Well, it's a great way for, a lot of guys I know that don't work at consulting companies who are still in the security industry. That's kind of how they make their kind of daily living. Is through these bug things. And I think it's a good approach. But I still, as I said, I still prefer designing stuff over breaking it any day.
Right.
Yeah, and we broke your laser rangefinder pretty
already?
well.
Did we?
Yeah, well, Roy and I did.
Oh.
Mostly Roy, because he's the assembly genius on the prop.
Uh-oh, what happened?
Well, I mean it in that we broke it and made it better.
Oh, good. Okay. I thought you meant you physically broke it.
Because, I know it's your baby, but man, was that thing slow.
Oh, gosh.
I'm working on that. I'm working on optimizing it. Yes, it is very slow. One hertz.
I had to listen to Roy Eltham go through every single, clock cycle and explain to me so that he could, hear it out loud himself, go through every single byte of reading the information out of that camera into RAM over and over and over again while he tried to figure out ways in which he could optimize it.
So he actually might have some ideas.
I know way too much about your damn laser rangefinder.
Which is good because it's open source and that's the goal.
Yep.
But yeah, he sent me some proposed optimizations. And basically with the rangefinder it's tough because I use a 640 by 480 CMOS camera by a company called OmniVision. Mm-hmm. And actually have it set for the rangefinder portion at 640 by 16. So it's like a long, skinny band that the camera's seeing, and I'm looking for the laser. Mm-hmm. But the propeller operates at normally 80 megahertz. I had to overclock it to 96 megahertz, and even then, at a 2 megahertz pixel clock, which ended up being I think 2 frames a second, I was just stretching the amount of, at least up to my capabilities of writing assembly code to grab the pixels without missing pixels, grab the pixels, store them in RAM, and get them ready for the rest of the routine before the next frame started. So it's really time. There are a lot of time constraints, and you kind of have to cycle count everything. And Roy, luckily, is way more experienced at writing propeller assembly code and has some suggestions of buffering each line and doing some of the post processing per line instead of per frame, because that can kind of speed things up. So yeah, right now the code is it's a little bit slow. It's about one sample per second, especially because with the rangefinder I have to take 2 frames. I take 1 frame with the laser off, 1 frame with the laser on, and then subtract the frame so it makes it easier to identify where the laser is. And then I have to do all the triangulation and the trigonometry to determine range to the target object. So there's a lot of stuff going on within that 1 frame or one cycle. But yeah, I think it can be done a little bit faster, and that's that will be an update later. And the good thing is because it's open source, people can look through the code and rip it apart and find problems and fix things and post stuff to the Parallax Object Exchange. And then just for people that don't want to mess with that, we just release new code and they load it up through the prop interface, and it just makes it really easy.
Right. And speaking of propeller, do you like working with a propeller, and are there other chips that you prefer working with?
It was a great chip. I'd never worked with it really before. I did one propeller-based project before the rangefinder, which was something called the B sodomizer.
Yeah.
Blue screen of death, oh miser. I'm trying to think if there's any zombie apocalypse uses for it, but essentially it was taking advantage of how easy it was to generate VGA signals on the prop, and made essentially a pass-through device that you'd plug in between a laptop or a computer and a monitor, and it would operate totally normally. But then there was a timer on the device, and also an infrared receiver to receive remote control commands. And when it received the right command or it timed out, it would switch to a blue screen of death. So the user goes, "Oh no, I've been, my computer crashed. Now what do I do?" And then of course they reboot the computer. The propeller, the B sodomizer detects that, goes back to the pass-through mode, and then 10 minutes later it does it again.
That's too
It's
funny.
really messing with people.
And that actually has a lot of risks, especially if you tag on a nice little program that boots up, gets loaded and boots up when the computer restarts. Because I think.
Oh yeah, right. You could couple that with some malware and
Yep.
Inject something in their machine,
Yep.
and then cause them to reboot it. Because sometimes people don't reboot for weeks, right? So maybe you throw up a BSOD, but you could probably do that in software anyway, of just crashing the machine if you have access to it remotely. But yeah, cause the BSOD, cause them to reboot, and then have it load malicious code. So that was a fun one that I released at DEF CON with Zaz, one of the guys that I worked on the show with.
Yep.
Which was pretty fun, and that was propeller based. But then the rangefinder was the Beast Atomizer was mostly off the shelf spin based objects that other people had written, and the rangefinder was just infinitely more complicated. And I'd done some of the stuff in spin, but I'd never worked with propeller assembly before, and I had to figure out how to load my own cog and execute stuff out of there. And it was definitely interesting. The lack of debugging was really killing me. Chip Gracie, who designed the part, is always like, well, if you need to debug, then you didn't design your code properly to begin with. Because he's from the school of writing everything on paper and then writing everything on paper before he went to school, and then going to school and typing it all in on the Apple II, and if it doesn't work, he'd go home and debug it on paper and then try it again the next day.
Yeah, that's the school that I come from too.
I do to a point. It's just not efficient.
I don't do it that way anymore, but I remember doing it that way back then. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you did it, right? That's you didn't have the option really of a debugger unless you were very lucky. But there was, for writing assembly code, there was a program called PASD, which was the Propeller Assembly Debugger, that somebody wrote that at least let you debug a particular piece of your assembly code running on a cog, which was helpful to a point. But when you're running, pretty fast trying to suck a frame off the camera, it was hard. So debugging was hard with the propeller. I would probably use it again for certain projects. It would need to work for that project. With the laser rangefinder, it was actually the most suitable part that I'd looked at. Besides the fact that it was a parallax part, and we thought it would be cool to open source that design to help kind of push the people using the propeller.
Right.
And that parallax essentially, that's like a $0 line item on the BOM, so we could keep the cost of the whole unit down more. Right. It seemed to work, but every project is different, and I tend to lean towards Freescale.
Yep.
Just because of all the designs I've done with the Freescale processors and the relationship I have with that company. They'll give me really good pricing, low end 8-bit pricing, parts are what I use a lot anyway. Most of the designs I do are fairly simple processor-wise or resource-wise. So I could use a 25-cent Freescale part or 50-cent Freescale part as opposed to a $5 or $7 propeller, for example, or high-end ARM chip or whatever. So I like Freescale parts, and Freescale does have some higher-end stuff too. I just don't really use it. And I have a lot of code that already exists, a lot of configurations, a lot of various designs that are all Freescale, so it just makes it easier to get up and running on a design where I can copy and paste different things to get a good baseline.
Sure.
The old 8-bit technology is very important to keep around. Being a bit of a minimalist myself, I can definitely appreciate how important it is to keep technology that is completely understandable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you never know when something's going to happen where you need to build yourself back up from some sort of scratch.
Yeah, especially very quickly too, right? You don't want to have to mess around with setting up some ridiculous development environment and trying to dig out some half-baked engineering development board, right? With a lot of the overcomplicated microcontrollers that are out there, what if all you have to do is control a turret to launch your, your battery acid, right? You don't need to run Linux for that.
Right.
And all of these high-end devices have these Linux kernels, and you need to configure all this stuff. But a low-end 8-bit microcontroller does the job in many cases, and that's kind of why I choose to go that way. Is there's lots of things that can be done with 8-bit micros, and they still account for a huge majority of electronic devices that are out there. But I'm definitely a technology minimalist where I think there's a lot more that can be done with lower end devices, and I kind of shy away from devices that are completely over engineered and over feature filled and all this stuff. And I still, I mean, everybody loves iPhones, and I have one, but it's an iPhone 3G, and I just still question, I just want to use it as a phone, and maybe be able to like look up things when I'm at a flea market or something. But it's just there's a lot of stuff, a lot of products have so much technology integrated in them that I'm not really sure they need to, other than the fact that people think that they need to have the latest and greatest stuff.
Do you think it spoils people? Like, especially developers?
I think the point that we're at now is almost to the point where technology is aiding in the infantilizing people, and, the whole process of carrying around a phone that you can poke and make you giggle is all very masturbatory.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of, there's a lot of good that comes out of it, but there's also a lot of negative things. And from a designing point of view, I think it does maybe make it, I don't know, what was the word that you had said, Addie? You said a perfect word for what this all these high-end resources are doing. Does it make it easier? There's less constraints when there's a system that has essentially, humongous amounts of memory and peripherals and all of these things, and maybe your engineering doesn't have to be as good. Maybe the turnaround cycle can be quicker because people are just, writing a bunch of stuff that, a bunch of hacked code that kind of does the job, or maybe one person's doing one thing and one person's doing another, and then you combine the code, and it lifts the constraints, which I kind of like having the constraint, because it forces you to design more elegantly,
right,
and design for what you need, not for what you have,
right.
And it just ends up being cooler. It's sort of like I just thought of this, like when Steve Wozniak talks about designing the not only the Apple but also the Apple floppy drive and everything. It's like he was always so. He was just a complete engineer, and he always wanted to just design the most elegant, simple, functional thing that he could. And he wanted people to look at his code and look at his design and be like, oh my God, that is awesome. It's beautiful.
Right.
So when you have constraints, it sort of forces you to do that. But when you have higher end systems, I don't know. Some people will argue with me, I'm sure. I'm sure a lot of people will argue with me. But when you have higher end systems, it just seems like a lot of the lower level stuff is done for you. You can kind of throw stuff on top, and it just doesn't lend itself to the elegantness of a lower end.
Yeah, I've gotten into this debate with Roy Eltham quite a few times, and because he sort of does development for the most advanced platforms, being into game design professionally, and the best way that he's explained it to me is that the fact is that compilers now, you can't really optimize because they're going to re-optimize better than you can anyway, simply because the processors are so wound up in on themselves and do so much strange stuff that isn't even really like
relevant.
It doesn't make sense to humans. We just don't think that way.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're working with something like a 8-bit microcontroller, you can understand the entire system end to end, and therefore optimize it in clever ways that only a human could come up with, which can sometimes be a heck of a lot more efficient than something that a very clever compiler would solve with brute force.
Yeah, and a lot of times compilers think they're optimizing and they're not. And in those cases, if you're on a complex system, it's a lot harder to figure out exactly what it's doing. And, Roy's response is sort of what I would expect somebody to say. And, in a way it's true, but in a way it's also sort of lazy, right? It's like, just
Roy.
let the... Yeah, Roy. we can talk about this one. But, it's like, let the compiler do it all and just assume it's right. But to his defense, I guess you have to with complicated systems.
Right.
Yeah,
but in lower end systems, you don't. So.
They're doing projects that have 20 million lines of code very easily, and that's like C. Goodness knows what it translates to in assembler, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way for humans to manage that size code base. It's just not possible.
and that's another reason why, working on my own and working on little hobbyist electronic modules and consumer devices, it's easier to work with lower end systems on your own, right? Probably on Roy's team working on this, on what he's working on these high end processors, it's probably more than just Roy.
Oh yeah.
Right? You have a whole team of people that everybody is working on this platform because you have to. There's no real way for a single person to do everything that's required for high-end systems. So I just kind of like the lower-end stuff. I think it also kind of, it's just since I grew up, with the Atari 400 computer and kind of that simple type of machine, it just seems natural for me to design around things like that. And I enjoy it more. I like having control. I like having low-level control of what's going on in the system and knowing, setting registers and flipping bits and doing all of these things that are essentially on the bare metal of the part.
Right. And that's like, I'm currently just starting to learn how to program in Spin. Before this, I didn't have any interest whatsoever in anything programming. Thanks
so
to
is Spin your first attempt of embedded system design at all using the propeller? Oh wow!
Yep,
that's quite a leap to start there.
I've looked every 2 years. I'll look at one of those Learning C for Dummies websites. I'll stare at it for a little bit and then just turn it and then close it. And I'm just like, all right, no, not interested.
Addie got interested in zombies, which got her interested in ham radio.
Yep.
And that got her interested in analog electronics.
Love it.
And that sort of brought her into the community to the point where she started getting into debates about things like how the Arduino sucks.
I didn't say that. But it brings me to this because, I like the idea of low-level systems where you know where everything is. You know that if you flip this bit, this other little thing can happen or whatever. But, what makes me worried is, it's not a worry per se, but what burdens me, I guess, a little is, how you have to have shields on the Arduino to do anything, how you have to go to the object exchange to find things that other people have done. And I don't if I were to write code for myself, I wouldn't like to use somebody else's code.
Right.
I would want to optimize it myself. I'd want to be able to do it completely myself without having to rely on somebody else's hand.
Or maybe even, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I like the object exchange, but I always want to understand exactly what the code does that I'm using if I'm using someone else's.
Right.
And it is risky. I only do this with the propeller because the object exchange is there and it's nice. I can't speak to the Arduino because I only used it once to make a really silly video with Brie Pettis that's online about it, back when you worked at Make Magazine. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, I mean, if you're using someone else's code, especially in an open source community where people are essentially hacking stuff together to get it working,
right?
If you're relying on that code for something like an actual product, you better be damn sure you know exactly what it's doing,
right?
Because you're using it in a piece of yours. But if you're just hacking stuff together, which I think the majority of people are doing, you can grab some code from here and grab some code from there and slap something together and make it work. And that's not necessarily bad. It just you might not learn what you actually are doing. And maybe that I think is part of the problem of going with something like an Arduino or like possibly even the propeller using the object exchange, where you end up in the middle, where you don't know the low end. You haven't learned the low end stuff, but you've learned enough to be able to cobble some things together.
Right.
So maybe those people will have to kind of learn some of the background history and move backwards to learn about spin and learn about kind of the lower level stuff after the fact. But I don't know. I mean, there's good and bad for it. I'm definitely not going to...
Yeah, no, I mean, it's for people who, like the answers first and work backwards from there, like that object exchange or like code.
I think the object exchange is a very, very important part of the propeller ecosystem, if you will. But when you start getting into things where whatever it's hooked to is mission critical, then it's just sort of not an option.
I think it might just be the way I learn.
Right now,
Yeah, I mean,
we're building a 8-foot robotic camera jib for our studio here. And, it's got really big, high-torque DC motors on it, and it's going to have a $500 camera attached to the end of it. So I can't really rely on, stuff I just cobble together from the object exchange and just put the spin glue in between the parts. I actually need to know exactly what it's doing at every single moment, because otherwise that camera could go flying across the room.
And then if it fails, at least you can blame only yourself and not someone else who wrote the object.
Correct. Or blame me, whichever.
Yeah, it's definitely Addie's fault.
The object exchange has been it's just supremely useful for me for doing the rangefinder stuff. And it is, because sometimes there is no point in reinventing the wheel, assuming the wheel works in the first place, right? Sure. And I think that's what we're saying, is that a lot of that code, there's really, really clever people that are writing stuff and posting it there, and that I would probably still be working on the rangefinder if it wasn't for the object exchange. Even just things as simple as as seemingly simple as high-speed serial routines or SPI or this and that. Where on the propeller is essentially a blank slate. So setting up I2C or SPI or something like that is not as easy as just turning on a peripheral on a microcontroller. You have to actually have some code to do it, and I think most people would be stuck with the propeller without using the object exchange.
Yeah, and some of those objects have been around for a long time and have been vetted. Yeah. And by really, really smart people. And if you see an object up there that's like revision 6 or something like that, you can pretty much guarantee that thing's going to work perfectly without any trouble.
And I would say that most people probably won't even post an object on the Parallax Object Exchange until they know that it works.
Unless they get flack for it.
Yeah. Yeah, because the propeller community, people like reviewing code and giving comments and optimizations and everything, and that's how it should be. So I would say for most of the objects up there are posted by people that are involved in the community, are continually looking to update their stuff.
Sure.
I don't think it's too premature to say so, but details are still being worked out. But before too long here, we're actually going to be starting to produce a podcast specifically about this topic of Addie learning how to program and spin.
Awesome.
Roy and I are going to be answering her questions, and that's basically all it's going to be. She'll be the one sort of steering the boat, asking questions about whatever she's curious about with the propeller and spin and whatnot. And she'll have an intermediate level person in me to sort of act as a translator, and like super genius Roy Eltham to ask the super technical stuff.
Yeah, that's a great idea, especially since you're starting at essentially
nothing.
Then people can watch it or listen and kind of follow along with you, because it is a little daunting. To get involved with the propeller without having any other experience is not an easy task, I would say. And, Parallax does a great job with the reference boards and all their schematics and everything and the object exchange. But it's still, without having experience in embedded system design or designing with microcontrollers or anything, it's a very difficult endeavor. If you just even think about the propeller with eight cogs, 8 cores, right? It's what's a core? You mean code can run in one and it could do something else in another, but it's sharing slices of time, it's sharing memory. How do you share memory? There's all these things that are just so weird that came out of Chip's amazing mind.
Yeah.
That you have to put yourself in Chip's amazing mind to kind of to figure it out. But once you know propeller, you can work with anything lower end or anything higher end, and it will be a piece of cake.
I think Chip, I could probably very, very comfortably live in Chip's mind, because it just all made perfect sense to me when I discovered it. And I was like, yeah, that's right. He basically took 8 Commodore 64s and hooked them all to one. Yeah, I like it. It's awesome.
But you had experience working with digital systems before.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Yep.
But from going from scratch here, she becomes this like completely invaluable resource to the community because she's going to ask questions that none of us would.
That's right. And it's going to help. I think it will help bring more new people to the community, right? Because if she goes through the process and then they can kind of watch it and follow along, and now you're kind of building all these other experts at the same time.
My only complaint thus far is that engineers write for engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even in their comments.
Even.
Well, yeah, I mean, I assume if someone's going to read my code that they're going to have some semblance of,
you know,
and
that's a fair assessment. You know, there's no reason that a noob would be reading the comments, you know, necessarily. So
of an assembly language based frame grabber.
Yep.
Or something.
Yep. I didn't understand half that, but yep.
So yeah, but eventually once you go through this process, I'll expect to see some optimizations on my rangefinder.
I think it would be hilarious if Addie ended up as one of those PASM nerds that just sits there hand optimizing code.
I can't see it.
Well, even spin. I mean, spin is one of those things where you can optimize spin too, because it's pretty slow on its own. It's pretty inefficient, but it's very useful.
Yeah.
But there's tricks you can do in spin to make things faster. And somebody actually posted on the Parallax forums about the rangefinder. Was like, I looked at your code and you could change these things and save 500 milliseconds. And that's a lot of time.
That's a lot of time, yeah.
And it was just by changing some things within spin itself. So even having a good understanding of spin is good. Like my understanding of spin is sort of survival mode, because I write in C in assembly, and spin is like, okay, I sort of has a little bit of C. Yeah. It's more like Pascal or something, but it's enough to get it done, but I definitely wouldn't consider myself to be an expert in it.
Sure. Yeah, we'll see. Well, I mean, I've already come across one aspect of the code that kind of makes me wonder why it was like that, but I don't know. It's just from my noob.
Some of that is just reorganizing your synaptic connections to the point where it starts to make sense.
I suppose. Yeah. As long as I don't fall in the trap of like being like everybody else. Because I think it's possible to not be like everybody else.
All right. Before we get too far into the clock here, we gotta let Addie do her usual grilling of the guests. So I'm gonna let her get started on that.
Okay.
Is that of me?
Yes.
Oh.
Grill.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a few questions before we get into the zombie questions.
Sure.
But what do you think the next step for hackers is?
Oh, wow.
If there is one.
Well, there is. I mean, the world is always changing, right? So what we thought was cool back in the 80s and 90s as far as hacking and exploring systems, this next generation, now that the internet is here, there's kind of a different type of hacker. Where now everything's networked. So there's, people looking a lot at network and software stuff. And it's just going to continue. The hacking mindset is always going to be embedded in certain types of people. Mm-hmm. Like I get emails and people say, well, how do I become a hacker? And it's like, if you have to ask somebody, you will not become one. Right? It's like, it's sort of ingrained in you.
Sure.
So people will always be like that, and they'll always look for, interesting things to hack on. Maybe it's going to be biotech or 3D printing. It's like, the 3D printing is sort of it's in the early stages. It's sort of like the Homebrew Computer Club. I think when, Woz and Jobs brought their Apple to the Homebrew Computer Club, that's the state where 3D printing is right now. And there's people that are doing amazing things with essentially very little in the way of 3D printing technology. So, maybe people are going to start doing that. There's always going to be malicious types of hackers and attackers attacking systems, especially because the internet is so pervasive now. So hacking is not going to go away. It's just, it will continually evolve.
Okay.
And then it'll make me feel older and older.
Well, you're fairly at the forefront of a lot of this even now, in terms of like the projects that you work on. I mean, they've not been done before, no one's approached them before.
You can tell Joe and I are getting to be pretty freaking old school at this point, just by the way we're like, it's 32-bit nonsense.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know, it's true. But yeah, I would say from the security perspective, I have not been at the forefront. People are doing amazing things in software and networking and stuff. But yeah, I mean, been done before. Like the rangefinder, there's lots of other expensive rangefinders out there, and then there's, of course, you have ultrasonic and infrared. But I was looking for a unique way to do it in a low-cost way and apply my kind of hacker mindset to that.
Sure.
In every project, I apply that to, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure. It's actually interesting because these days hackers are almost getting into the socio-economic policies of, like with Occupy Wall Street, like Anonymous, and they're to a certain, Well, they're really, I would say, affecting things or making a change or changing the way that things are happening. Right. Whereas opposed to like when we were doing this stuff back in the day, it never really. And at the Loft, we would always say we want to make a dent in the universe, which I guess Steve Jobs had said, and we would always find these problems, and the media would pick up on it and whatever, but it never felt like anything was actually being done about it. And that's what really made me, just as kind of skeptical as I am, is that for 10 or 20 years I've been saying the same stuff about hardware security, blah blah blah, but nothing's really been done. But nowadays, like the hackers of today are doing things that are actually having a direct real world effect. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think that's also just maybe it took 30 years for hackers to get to the point where technology allowed them to do that. But it is cool to see because there's much more of a direct effect of what, cause and effect of what they're doing now. Yep.
Which some people will say is good and some people will say is bad.
Right. You always have.
Having watched it sort of morph and change over the decades here, I think a lot of what's sort of normal now about the community sort of spawns out of the hacktivism offshoot of hackerdom that sort of grew out of the leftovers of CDC and 2600 and Off the Hook and Emmanuel and all those folks out there who stopped paying as much attention to the technical aspect of it and started paying more attention to the political aspect of it.
Right. It was hacking. It was hacking for using the hacking toolbox or the skills of a hacker to further deal with the political side of things, as opposed to just being a hacker for a hacker's sake of learning a new technique or learning a new skill or exploring this or exploring that. So it's making use of the skills possibly that you had learned as a kid. Now people are using those to actually affect the world. But there definitely is a political slant to things, and I mean,
it's just interesting seeing it. I mean, go from, I don't know, just interesting to see its evolution.
Yeah, yes. And it's not like there wasn't any political change back then either. I mean, we're talking to somebody who testified before the Senate. It's always been part of it.
Yeah, but except then there wasn't a direct relationship to, the Loft guys testified, now everybody's safe, or now there's this new law, or now there's this, but nowadays hackers can actually do that, like with Anonymous or with other places that the entire world sees what they're doing, and whether they agree with it or disagree with it, it is a way of activism and hacktivism and whatever. But I think there's more of a direct relationship to what a group is doing to what happens, what happens as a cause of that, as opposed to when we were doing it, there wasn't as direct a connection. And maybe that's just because information didn't travel as fast, or it wasn't a hot button topic.
Yeah, this upcoming generation just thinks about the world in a very different way than we did.
Yeah.
We weren't connected in the same ways that they've been connected. We had to do, silly things like...
For better or for worse, really.
Like get around long distance charges because we were kids and we weren't in charge of the telephones that we were using to call BBSs in Sweden.
Right. And we wanted a new game.
Yeah. Good luck convincing your parents that that $500 phone bill was worth not having to pay for a $10 game.
Yeah. It definitely, right. It has definitely changed.
All right.
Which is why I'm starting my son with an Atari 400.
Nice.
Right on. Right on.
Very nice. Awesome. All right. So, okay. So now zombie questions. Right?
Okay.
I mean, I know we've done a little bit of
Oh,
that
the show's starting now?
Warm-up's over. So, what would be the 3 tools you would want to bring to your zombie apocalypse bunker?
Oh, soldering iron.
Yep.
I think it's great that all engineers make the
Wait.
exact same noise when you ask that question. Huh.
Do we have? Are we assuming that we have power? Like, will the soldering iron even work?
Are you bringing a way to make
Well,
power?
are you going to provide that in your bunker?
Roy's got solar
I am.
panels.
I don't know what you're doing.
So Roy is bringing power.
Yeah, he's bringing power.
He's gonna strap solar panels to his back and hike on over to Minnesota.
Okay, so assuming I could use Roy's power supply, because I don't want to use that as one of my 3.
Sure.
I would say soldering iron definitely. I'd need some tools. Like if I could, I'd wheel my toolbox there.
Okay.
Especially if we're doing some technology reclaiming, like we'd need a way to get access to that technology. So I would bring my toolbox, which if you've seen Prototype This, it's a gigantic toolbox, and it has wheels, and it was in the machine shop of Prototype This, and now it's filled with tools. So I would bring that. Which actually, maybe could I put my soldering iron in there?
You could.
Yeah, okay.
I will allow you to free up some space.
Okay, so the toolbox contains the soldering iron, and actually inside that toolbox, it also has a parallax USB scope and a multimeter and a relay control board, and all of the basic tool, like basic stamp stuff.
Sure.
To do quick and easy code. So yeah, the entire toolbox. Geez, I don't know. I mean, probably. I'd have to bring my family.
Yeah, but they're not tools.
Oh, okay, so that doesn't count.
Yeah.
I want to bring some sort of weapon.
Okay.
But I'm not very good with weapons.
Okay.
So it would have to be something like a long-range thing where I don't have to aim it, but it would still hit zombies. Because I'm not good at hand-to-hand combat. And I'd be behind my bunker.
Wait, hardware hackers aren't good at hand-to-hand combat? Who'd have thunk?
I'm good at hand-to-keyboard combat. Geez, I don't know. So some sort of weapon. Let's see. Maybe like a. How about like an EMP? Some sort of EMP weapon.
That
zombies
would be awesome.
Yeah, some high
especially if
energy.
you did it at a frequency that would actually resonate in brain structures.
Yeah, like some EMP or like a rail gun or something that. Yeah, something like that.
That'd be epic.
High energy EMP, because you never know. Like zombies might be very particular to some frequency, like dogs. Right?
Yeah,
like some ultrasonic thing.
True.
So if you do some EM blast, that might drop them all.
That might just do the trick.
Yeah. Okay. So electromagnetic gun of some sort.
One possible source of a zombie outbreak could be infection of neural systems by nanites.
Oh.
And if it's a nanotech-based zombie infection, then an EMP would be very useful.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. But wouldn't it mess our own stuff up?
No, we'd have headphones on.
But I mean, wouldn't it mess
for
up?
EM blast, we'd have to. I don't know. We'd have to. Well, is your bunker made of metal? We could shield ourselves.
Concrete.
I think shielding electronics is just a good practice in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Shielded and grounded.
You would shield and ground your entire enclosure, because you don't want the zombies to be able to track any of your emissions anyway.
Yeah, no, none of that Tempest stuff that somebody used to talk about a lot.
That's right. And then what else? So maybe some transportation of some sort.
Okay.
Probably a bicycle.
A bike.
Just because I know how to ride one.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can do that. We're gonna have a zombie truck, so we'll just put a bike rack on the back.
Yeah, because the truck is good for certain things, but if you have to, having a bicycle is good for other things too. Especially if there's no cars on the road.
Yeah.
Saving gas and getting through areas that a truck might not be able to.
Very
or
true.
the truck could deter the zombies while I rush off the back with my bike to go get more car batteries for Dino or something.
Brilliant. And actually, it's kind of funny because I was looking through some of the projects that they did on Prototype This, or that you guys did, and Didn't you guys do a truck that like could go either crush through traffic or go over traffic or something?
So it was a truck that could elevate itself and drive over traffic, and it had omnidirectional wheels, so it could move in any direction. We could use that, except the problem is that the legs that came out of the truck to lift it up took up the entire bed of the truck. So it wouldn't be good in a zombie apocalypse because you wouldn't have anywhere to carry out stuff. But you would be higher than the zombies, but then they would just climb up the legs.
Jeez.
Addie's currently shopping for a 1939 Chevy pickup truck to convert to an electric vehicle that she's going to have all painted up and decaled to be her zombie truck.
It's going to be called Deliverance.
Awesome.
Very cool. Okay, so we got the toolbox, the super cool toolbox. We got
the engineering toolbox.
The engineering toolbox. All right. We've got the EMP railgun thing.
Yep.
And we've got I got bad short-term memory.
Bicycle.
The bike, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, and then just because I like asking random questions, I got two more. One, favorite hacking movie.
War Games.
Okay.
War Games with Sneakers a very close second.
Okay. All right. Favorite game.
Video game or just any game?
Both.
Favorite video game, probably Kaboom.
Okay.
For the Atari 2600.
Okay.
Favorite game? Chess. No, I don't know. I just said that because of War Games.
Fair enough.
No, I don't know.
Tic-tac-toe is the only game that's ever saved the world.
But you can never win. I guess the only way to win is not to play.
Yeah. It was a great movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say, I don't know, maybe playing circuits with my son. How's that? That's a game.
Cute.
Or playing handy-manny tools.
Have you seen that Play-Doh circuit stuff?
Play-Doh? No.
You should check it out.
Squishy circuits.
Yeah, Squishy circuits. She's done a TED Talk, hasn't she?
Yep, I think so.
Look that up. You will have so much fun with your son just making circuits out of Play-Doh. It's great.
That you can squish. Yeah, we use snap circuits, which are fun. And then he has his own little bowl of electronics at my workbench.
That's awesome.
So he comes down and he can actually he'll fiddle around with stuff while I'm working. And if something like one of our cordless phones broke a few months ago, and we opened it up to try to see what was wrong, and it was just we couldn't figure it out, and it was whatever. So we took it all apart. Now he has all the pieces, and he's like, I'm going to try to fix the phone, and he'll work on it. And actually, by the way, I just taught him how to solder.
He's 3 years old.
He's 3.
Oh my God.
he doesn't have the dexterity to do both the solder and hold the iron at the same time. But I bought a little kit for him. I can't remember what it's called. It was it's the pencil from Adafruit that makes really annoying noises when you draw on the graphite. I don't know, something with the resistance of the graphite. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a very simple kit. And on his 3rd birthday, I told him a little while ago when he turns 3 that I'd teach him how to solder. And he sat on my lap before and wore the goggles, and we have the fume extractor.
How cute.
So now he can either hold the iron or apply the solder and build the kit. So it's super cool.
That is really cool.
And what's even better is that he actually thinks it's cool.
That is pretty
Because
good.
that probably won't last forever.
So now, wait, he's in preschool?
I don't know. I was showing Addie how to solder, and her eyes sort of lit up, and she started giggling, and she's like, "Can I make little solder? Can I make solder balls? Can I?
Solder balls are fun.
That's a rare, solder ball. That's a rare occurrence because I showed my wife and she rolled her eyes.
Give it a little time. In the beginning, I pretty much did the same thing. I'm like, nope, don't want anything to do with any of that. But now I like analog electronics quite a bit. So
yeah, that's cool.
Okay, and I'm trying to think. Is there anybody in particular who inspires you?
Wow. That's a hard one
You're
to think
asking
of
a
off the
guy
spot.
who got to hang out with, I mean,
Your
a group
inspiration.
of people who are
Yeah,
very inspiring.
Lots of people inspire me. It's not as easy as a question as my favorite hacker movie, because I've thought about that one a lot.
Yep.
So I can't name a particular person, but a lot of people. And
Okay.
I always feel, I never feel qualified in what I'm doing. You know, like I always feel like I can do something better, and maybe that's the hacker mindset. Like I always want to improve on stuff, and I never feel qualified. Say like I'm invited to give a talk somewhere. I never feel that I deserve to be the one up there giving a talk. And so it's always like this quest to kind of one up myself. And I think that's, you know, because I see all these other people and I'm inspired by all these other people doing things and always want to be better, make myself better. So yeah, I'm inspired by lots of people. I don't have a particular one.
Okay.
but
How
off
about
the
just
people.
like off the top of your head? 2, 3. Doesn't have to be your favorite.
Actually,
just...
the first guy is Oz,
Okay.
who I worked on the TV show with, and
Yeah.
he was. It turns out we knew a lot of the same people, but we had never actually met. But he's a super cool dude, and one of the guys that I talk to, the only guy that I talk to from the show every day, if he's not traveling in some far off land without internet access. And but yeah, he's an inspiration in a number of ways.
Cool. I will take Zaz. He was
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I have my,
You're all questioned out.
yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any other zombie questions that I had.
Well, I do have. So okay, here's one.
Yeah.
So right now, the latest project I'm working on that at least I can somewhat talk about is a few years ago I designed. Actually, my first module that I designed for Parallax back in 2002 or 2003 was the EMIC text-to-speech module, which was a speech synthesis module.
Yep.
And what I'm working on now, that one we sold for quite a number of years, and we were using the WinBond WTS701, which was a speech synthesis IC, and I was doing all of the support stuff around it. WinBond discontinued that part, so we did a last time buy and bought all their parts, and then we eventually ran out, so we had to discontinue the module.
Sure.
But I'd found a new part that I'm using, and I'm working on the next generation of speech synthesis module, of text-to-speech, for Parallax. And that's what I have right in front of me right now. So that's a cool one.
Cool.
Hey, do me a favor with that. If you can find a way to tweak it so that the voice can be like coming out at a set frequency, like a auto tuning effect.
Oh yeah.
Do so.
I don't think I can do auto tuning, but I can do. You can change pitch. You can change voices and speak in Spanish on this one. But I was thinking that it would be useful for the zombie apocalypse, because now you can have, you know, warning systems and stuff, and you can communicate with the zombies by typing instead of by speaking.
Hey,
That
there
makes
you
any
go.
sense.
So they don't recognize your voice just in case they think
Yeah.
you're particularly tasty.
Could also be
yeah.
really useful for decoy, like
Oh, yeah.
what do you
Help,
call those little LED
zombies.
things that you can throw and stick
Yeah, like
to
the
things?
LED throwy.
Yeah, would just add your little voice synthesis module to it, and it could be blinking and talking, and that would definitely distract some zombies.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
That's true.
We could stick them all in like a Tesla coil field thing and then zap them to death. Right? Faraday cage the everything but, you know, and just have LED blinkies all over the place.
Yeah, that would probably drive him away.
Yeah, I think so. Or kill him, whichever.
Yeah.
I could handle both.
I'm looking forward to that then.
Death by LED.
Will that be through Parallax?
Mwahaha.
The death by LED or the speech synthesis module?
Huh. That's a good question. I meant the text to speech, but
Yes, the text to speech will be available through Parallax. I'm ironing out, or at least trying to iron out a bunch of communication issues right now. The part I'm using is, there's a reason that there hasn't been a lot of other text to speech devices out there, and this part is a complete pain in the ass to work with. But I would say in the next few months I'll probably have a prototype, and then we'll
Awesome.
go to production after that.
Awesome.
cool. Make sure we're on the list this time for the the super secret beta testers.
Beta test, okay.
Because I do artificial intelligence and AIs and neural nets that actually talk.
Okay.
And a text-to-speech would just make it awesome for being able to put my neural nets on a prop and let them talk.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I wasn't planning on doing a beta test for this because it's more of a simple device, but now I will.
Awesome.
Cool.
And I'll make sure you guys get one.
Thanks.
And there's still so many uses for doing text-to-speech on hobbyist electronic devices and industrial stuff, and it's definitely lacking. Like, you can do speech synthesis or voice generation on a prop. There's I think the SpeakJet IC. There's a few other solutions, but none of them do what I would want a text-to-speech device to do. And that's ultimately why I designed stuff that I designed, because I want something that does it that way.
Yeah, I imagine you kind of want just like a serial thing that you can just, throw a string of text at and maybe some options beforehand, and it just does it.
Exactly. It just does it. And that's how most people want. I think there's definitely a lot of space for complicated sorts of modules that you can configure and do all sorts of things. But in reality, most people just want a device or a module that will just do what they want to do so they can use it as a building block to build whatever it is.
Yep.
Right? And that's so as simple and easy as possible is kind of my deal.
Cool.
Well, that's something to look forward to.
It is.
Thank you, Joe, for joining us this week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you at least brought this whole zombie apocalypse thing to the forefront of my mind, because now I'm going to be worried about it all the time.
Prepare.
Yeah, now
Inevitable.
so I already have to worry about earthquakes, and now I have to worry about this. So, thank you.
Did you get hit by that 3.9?
Well, there was one in Berkeley. I think that was a 3.9 in Berkeley across the bay a few days ago. But then that night there was one here, and I don't know where the epicenter was, but yeah, we were shaking. It was fun.
I think that was the one that our friend Mark Van de Wettering over at Pixar, he was at work fairly late that night, and he's like, "Yeah, it shook my butt."
It shook our couch. We were watching TV. It shook our couch. It was neat. Little earthquakes are always fun. Big ones, not so much.
Not so much. And those you gotta watch out for, because zombies could rise from the earth.
That's true. And I do have my little earthquake survival kit, which
Nice.
Now I can dub the zombie survival kit as
Excellent.
Yeah.
It's a good time to prepare your son.
Makes
That's
for
right.
much better vinyl logos on the side of it, too.
well. That's right.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming to talk with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right, that wraps it up for me. I think Addie's pretty much exhausted her list. Was there anything that you wanted to plug?
No, just everybody visit my website, which is grandideastudio.com.
Yep.
And that's where I post everything. Sometimes you have to kind of dig through the portfolio section to see what I'm doing. But yeah, check out the site. I update it all the time. And then you can always follow me on Twitter, which is @JoeGrand. And I barely write anything, but when I do, it's very important.
Exactly. Mind-bogglingly.
That's right.
So,
And usually if I do something new, I will post it on Twitter as well.
awesome.
And for the first time on this show, the show has its own website, ZombieTech.tv. So you, listeners, may not necessarily be aware who we are. I'm Whisker, and she's Addie, and together we do TYMKRS.com,
Or
which
Toy
does
Makers.
2 videos every week, a daily blog post, and 1 original song a week, along with this podcast.
Yep.
You can find links to all of that stuff over there at TYMKRS.com. Joe's on Twitter. I believe it is
At
Joe Grand.
Yep.
And we are also on Twitter at TYMKRS.
Correcto.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you all next Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.